Meeting is now being recorded.
Great. So we just keep those for you to refer back to for future reference, or if you'd like to share with colleagues. I should say and/or. Feel free to do both. Just another quick little note. I see a couple folks have signed in under my name. I know that's because I forwarded my registration link. Totally fine. We're very happy to have you join us. But next time, there's a button you can click in the bottom right that says, "This isn't me." So you can go ahead and sign in with your own name. Just something to keep in mind for the future. Otherwise, right now, you should either be seeing a nature scene or the opening slide that says Strive Together. If you're not seeing the slides, you will be in just a moment, so no need to worry about that. If, as I said, you have any questions either of a technical nature or for the presenters throughout the entire webinar, don't feel that you have to hold it to the end. Go ahead and type them in the public chat section, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, or you can use the Q&A, which is the chat bubble in the top middle right of the screen. It's an orange and white chat bubble. It says Q&A below it. If you click on that, will send your questions directly to myself, Cassie, who will introduce herself in a moment, who's the group facilitator, and our two presenters, Colin and Ted. So again, we will wait to answer questions until the end, but feel free to send them at any time throughout the presentation. Otherwise, I think that's it for me. For those of you who are waiting on any summit materials, you should have gotten an email last week with links to the presentation, and then we will be sending out a link to watch the sessions that we recorded this week. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Cassie.
Great. Thanks, Abra. Yeah, we're really looking forward to this webinar today. I think Abra went over all the housekeeping items. Please just include information in either the public chat or the Q&A, and Abra and I will keep an eye on it at the end of the presentations, making sure that our presenters address all those questions. My name is Cassie Brooks. I'm the facilitator from the Chicago Housing Authority, and I think without further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Colin from Strive Together to tell us a bit more about their organization and partnership. And then we'll see, as often in these presentations, we have first sort of like a topical overview, and then one of the housing authorities speaking about the work at their level at a PHA. So first we have Colin with Strive Together.
Well, thank you, Abra and Cassie. I am very excited to be joining you all today. My name is Colin Groth. I'm the Vice President of Programs at Strive Together, an organization that believes in the success of every child, every step of the way from cradle to career. And so I couldn't be more excited to have the opportunity to speak with you all today and to be joined by a great colleague of mine, Ted Dezember, who's going to, as was mentioned earlier, share a little bit about what this work really looks like on the ground. But I wanted to start by making sure we believe in results-based meetings and making sure that we're checking in, making sure people are in the right room or the right chat room, as it were in this case. And so we've proposed a few results that we would actually tackle over the course of the next 50 or so minutes. The first is really around increasing understanding of Strive Together's approach to collective impact and our theory of action. The second is to identify ways that housing authorities are working to improve educational outcomes by using this collective impact approach. Third would be to answer your questions. And fourth, if it makes sense, is really to talk about how you all could get involved with Strive Together network members or local partnerships, or even think about what it would look like to form a collective impact partnership in your community. So excited to be with you all and wanted to really provide a bit of an overview on collective impact broadly, because this is a term that in some ways has become kind of a buzzword over the past few years nationally. And really a lot of that comes from, there was an article written by some of the folks from FSG, John Kania and Mark Kramer. It was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in the winter of 2011. That really talked about collective impact being the commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social problem. So what does that really mean, right? That's a high-level way of talking about a new way of partnering in communities. And what we see from Strive Together's perspective, and I'll talk a little bit about our origins and our work in a moment, but what we see is really that this is an evolution in many communities where, many communities might start with a culture of individual action, right, where program providers, practitioners might be working on a particular issue, education, housing, homelessness, right? But very much taking individual action. And so, the evolution that happens in many communities, and we saw this happen a number of years ago, particularly when United Ways and communities started to talk about community impact, where communities began to say, well, we actually need to align around common issues. We need to start sharing program information and start talking about how we're designing our efforts to improve housing or homelessness or education. And we actually need to align our efforts around these common issues or populations. And so for many years, we've seen communities kind of taking this more coordinated approach to working together. But what we're ultimately talking about is getting to what we call collective impact. This is a group of practitioners, of partners working together, not around the same issue area, but actually towards a common outcome. In this case, they're using disaggregated student, school, resident level data, right? Whatever the unit of change is, they're actually using disaggregated data to do their work, and they're using that data to continuously improve practices over time. That's what we're really talking about with collective impact. And there are a few key differences that we see in collective impact versus what we call traditional collaboration, right? So now that in many ways the philanthropic community has aligned around some of the language of collective impact, frankly, we see a lot of different organizations repackaging traditional collaboration as collective impact in many ways to garner funding. And so there's four key differences that we see between traditional collaboration and collective impact. The first being that really in traditional collaboration, we're often coming together around programs or initiatives. And in many cases, it's actually convening around an RFP, right? A funder or an individual in the community says, hey, we've got resources to do something, and a number of different folks raise their hands to say, hey, we want to do that together. That's often what we think of as traditional collaboration. What we're talking about in collective impact is before we ever talk about a specific program or a way that we're going to take action, we actually have to come together first to identify the outcomes that we want to improve. That's a key difference that we see from collaboration to collective impact. How are you coming together first around outcomes before you're ever talking about programs or initiatives? That's point number one. Point number two is really around the use of data. And what we often see in communities is that whether it's in education, I would imagine it's similar in housing, but data is often used as a punitive hammer, right? It's something that can be used to lord over grantees or practitioners or programs. It's unfortunately something that has become really around a culture of strict accountability. And accountability is important, right? There's a definite need for accountability towards results. But the shift that we hope to see in collective impact and that we're seeing in communities around the country is actually using data today to get better tomorrow. So it's a shift from multi-year, 3-year evaluations, double-blind control trials, right? All these sorts of analyses that provide data looking back at what happened within a program to actually saying, how can we use data today to get better tomorrow? And Ted, actually, in particular, has been doing a lot of amazing work in King County to bring that approach to life for some of their residents and students in King County. The third thing is around traditional collaboration. Often, I used to work actually in the transit authority in Southwest Ohio, so my background is in transit. Before spending the last 7 years working in this education space, we would often have our CEO come in from a meeting in the community and saying, oh my gosh, we've got this incredible new partnership lined up, right? And everybody would dive under the table because that new partnership was like one more thing to add to your plate. It was that 7 a.m. coffee meeting, or it was the 5:30 drinks meeting. It was never part of what we did. And in collective impact, the work of partnerships actually has to be staffed and resourced. And for individual institutions that are connecting to a collective impact partnership, it actually has to become part of how you do your work. So that means getting written into job descriptions. That means having people who are dedicated to actually supporting the collective efforts. It's a big shift from, the coffee clutch before work to actually thinking about how you do your job differently every day in service to those outcomes. And the last key distinction is really around how we allocate resources in communities. And, you know, the point here is really in Cincinnati, where I'm based, and where the Work and Strive Together has grown from. You know, what we would often see was a wealthy individual going to another community and identifying some sort of new program that if we could only bring this program to Cincinnati, all of a sudden outcomes would get better, and frankly, we'd be Shangri-La. And what we found is that instead of advocating for ideas from outside of our community, what we really needed to do was change our systems locally to support what works locally for targeted populations. So you might have heard the language around bright spots, right? But in almost every community we've ever gone to, there are great existing local programs that are getting local results. Rather than that programmatic churn of advocating for ideas from other places, how can you actually use data in your community to identify what works locally and change systems to support that work? So I want to talk a little bit about the origins of our approach to collective impact. And this is a cartoon that actually comes to us from the Albuquerque Journal. We have a partnership called Mission Graduate in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And what you see here is a problem that we often see in the communities that we work in. You know, you have the business folks saying we need better educated workers. We have higher ed folks saying we need better educated high school grads, all the way down the line, right, to folks saying we need better prenatal health care. We need better health services in the early childhood space. This is actually similar to the origin story in Cincinnati. So the Strive Together national network evolved out of a local partnership that started in Cincinnati, which I had the pleasure to be a part of way back in 2006. And what we were talking about in Cincinnati was the need to increase our talent base, right? So Cincinnati is a very corporate town. You have Procter & Gamble, Kroger, Macy's, all these, big Fortune 500 companies. At that time, the book, The World is Flat, had come out by Tom Friedman, and everyone was talking about globalization. And so we really were having this conversation around how could we create a more talented workforce. And we went through and honestly failed on many of those lessons that I had just highlighted. You know, we were originally talking about starting a new program. If anyone's followed the work of the Kalamazoo Promise, we were going to raise a big endowed scholarship fund. And we were actually going to give, students that graduate from our high schools free tuition to Ohio colleges and universities. Which is not a bad thing to do, right, except what we heard, and then there was actually an interesting individual, our coroner, a gentleman named Dr. Odell Owens, stood up in one of the meetings and said, look, we're program rich and we're system poor. We're program rich and we're system poor, and as long as we continue to look for some silver bullet new program, not only are we not going to get better results for kids, right, but I'm going to have dead kids on my table. And coming from the coroner, that was a powerful statement. And so everyone sort of took a step back from the table and said, what would it look like for us to be system rich? And I think in some ways this slide is kind of the antithesis of that, right? It's a culture not of pointing fingers, right, but really of creating a new way of organizing for the success of students. And so for us at Strive Together, we created what we called the Student Roadmap for Success. And we recognize that it starts really, before birth with prenatal care, that every child needs to be ready for kindergarten, every child needs to be reading on grade level, et cetera, for us to get to our vision of cradle to career success for children. And so we organized our community to say, what would it look like to have our programs and systems align around these outcomes for kids? And so back in 2006, as the transit provider, one of the first engagements I had with the Strive Partnership, which is the name of our local Cincinnati partnership, was to say, what is the role of transit in supporting better outcomes for kids, particularly when it comes to employment? What's the role that we play in actually providing bus service to kids here in greater Cincinnati to actually access jobs in Kings Island, which is one of our summer theme parks, right? And every year Kings Island would bring in hundreds of kids from Europe and house them at the dorms of the University of Cincinnati and provide private transportation services. Well, meanwhile, at the Transit Authority, we had buses. We had actually federal funding called JARC, Job Access Reverse Commute, that was set aside for reverse commute services. We started to shift how we ran our summer service to actually get more of our kids to our jobs locally. That was a way that the Transit Authority could plug into this cradle to career roadmap. And I should note that all 69 now of the Strive Together network members are organized around this roadmap of outcomes for student success. And the vision, right, is really around shifting from people's mindsets in education, that education is really about the schoolhouse, to shifting to this vision of putting kids at the center. And in this case, the image here is somewhat institutional, right? It looks at housing, education, public safety, government agencies, et cetera. But you could just as quickly imagine, you know, Chance the Rapper or other social media or pop culture icons. What's the way that we can actually align all of the resources that support student success around that student, right? So moving away from the mental model of schools at the center of learning to actually putting kids at the center and aligning our community resources, whether they're health or housing or education, around the success of each and every student. Our approach really focuses on 4 principles. The first is around engaging the community. The second is you have to focus on eliminating locally defined disparities. Nationally, we care about racial and socioeconomic disparities. Many of our communities add to that focus by looking at special education needs, LGBTQ, and other disparities that might be defined locally. The third is that you have to develop a culture of continuous improvement. I know, Ted is, I think, going to speak a little bit to that. And the last one is about leveraging existing assets, right? This is not about the importation of new resources or new programs. This is about leveraging what works in your community, realigning resources. There's 2 key pieces to our approach: to Strive Together theory of action, which we'll talk about in a moment, and results count, which is a set of competencies for helping leaders move to action in a coordinated way. It's really been driven by the Annie Casey Foundation, and it's a method that we've been working with Ted and King County Housing Authority and other partners to bring to the Pacific Northwest. This slide demonstrates the Strive Together theory of action. For those interested, there's a more detailed version of this on our website, strivetogether.org. But what we have found is that there's actually a set, what we think has happened in collective impact is that it's become watered down by everyone sort of saying we're doing collective impact, right? So you see many different partnerships now saying, well, we're a collective impact partnership. We have some communities that tell us, well, we have 7 collective impact partnerships in our community. What we would say is that probably means you don't have any collective impact partnerships, right? Because if you don't have a place or a couple of places where people in the community are coming together, you're probably not doing collective impact. But this theory of action, to boil it down really simply, is this is all of the lessons that we've learned over the last 7 years now of doing this work nationally. There's a set of quality standards that are actually important for doing collective impact partnerships. And we've actually organized these in a developmental pathway for communities. So in what we call the exploring phase, it's really around defining your geographic scope, right? Building that cross-sector leadership table, coming up with your vision and mission, your outcomes and indicators, et cetera. It's also about getting that initial backbone staffing in place, engaging funders in the work. In the emerging phase, it's about establishing a baseline report, collecting and disaggregating that data, launching teams to improve those outcomes. And then in sustaining, it's really around, doing that work, taking action to move outcomes, thinking about mobilizing the community, reinforcing and refining your indicators. In systems change, it's actually when you're moving things within systems, right? You're changing policy, you're getting multi-year funding commitments, you're getting data sharing agreements for continuous improvement. This is when systems are actually changing to get those better results. And you'll notice in here, right, there's very little of information specific to education, right? Because our belief is that you could take this theory of action and apply it to housing or to homelessness or to environmental sustainability, right? Because based on those outcomes that you identify in that exploring gateway, it just is all about driving action towards those outcomes. So we talk about this theory of action not so much as a theory of action for educational improvement, but really for large-scale social change and getting to population-level results. This is just a snapshot of our network. This is slightly dated now because we've added a partnership now in Berea, Kentucky. But there are now 69 partnerships, more than 10,800 organizations, more than 30 states, and most importantly, more than 10.4 million children now living in Strive Together Cradle to Career Network member communities. This is something that certainly we're proud of, but more importantly, when we think about accountability for our work, we think about accountability to the 10.4 million kids living in our communities. And that's what we wake up every morning thinking about, how we can ensure that those children are going to be successful. Some examples of communities using data to get results. In Cincinnati and Dayton, we actually saw voter-approved initiatives to allocate nearly $20 million for quality pre-K. So every 3- and 4-year-old in Cincinnati and Dayton now has access to high-quality pre-K. That was done through local tax levies. That was done by having 10 years of data that says that that was a quality investment. The Cincinnati example was the highest passage rate in the history of the Cincinnati public schools. So it's really around mobilizing community for change. In Youth Initiative of Adams County, just outside of Denver, they've been using data to actually increase math scores by more than 15 percentage points in 1 year by using data for real-time improvement. Summit Education Initiative, also in Ohio, this is the Akron area. They've been using an ACT prep course to actually lower the number of students needing remedial math from 47% to 17% in college. Pretty incredible. And then in San Antonio, Bexar County, they've actually hit their 90% goal for 4-year on-time graduation, which they had originally set for 2020. All of this by using that theory of action, by using data for improvement, and by realigning systems to better support kids. Here's just some snapshots of what that looks like. You can see partners in Memphis. They're actually building the capability of nonprofits, including housing partners, to use data more effectively. In Portland, Oregon, they're using, this is what we call a run chart. This is FAFSA data completed over time. And what you can see here in blue is actually that there are particular interventions that they're trying over the course of the year. And so they're beginning to tie these interventions to the actual impact they're seeing over time in the data. And then you can see people actually process mapping in the lower right corner to understand what are the processes in place that are supporting students. But I thought what would be more impactful than me sort of talking from a national level about what collective impact could mean for housing partners. Over the past few years, we've really identified that for us to get to our results, we're going to have to shift our work, right? And we're going to have to focus on some different types of activities to get to our aspirational end game, which is that every child and youth has the supports and resources they need to achieve their full potential cradle to career. And what that means for us is to eliminate disparities, we're going to have to be much more intentional about engaging all of those sectors that I represented in that image earlier. And one of the key ones that we've been learning is really around housing. And so rather than me talking from a national level about what it might look like for housing to get involved in collective impact, I thought it'd be better to hand it over to an expert. And so I'm going to kick it over to Ted Dezember from King County Housing Authority to really bring this home.
All right. Thank you, Colin. And I don't know about an expert, but learning every day. So here at King County Housing Authority, I'm Ted Dezember. My title is Senior Manager of Educational Initiatives and Youth Programs here at King County Housing Authority in Washington State. We are the housing authority for the Puget Sound region, minus the cities of Seattle and Renton. So approximately 20-something municipalities and 17 school districts. We have around 20,000 children spread across the county in various programs. And so we are a large housing authority with lots of partners, and and so that's why we are really trying to roll up our sleeves and understand this whole collective impact thing. And I will share a little bit more about that. But what you can see here is this is some foundational elements kind of our work. And I'm sure my housing colleagues on the line would agree with this, is housing as a platform for improved outcomes. And so that might be health outcomes or employment outcomes, and certainly education outcomes. And acknowledging that intergenerational poverty is the result of many forces, and that housing is just but one part of the system that is needed for families to be able to achieve their hopes and dreams for themselves and for their kids. And so, you know, based off that acknowledgement that we are but one piece of a system, really speaks to why we are so interested in being participants in collective impact at various levels. To Colin's point, you know, around partnership, collaboration versus compared to collective impact, and what he was referencing around really coming together around specific outcomes instead of topics or areas of interest. And so to be able to do that, we have had to do a lot of work and reflection and talking internally as well as with our external partners to better understand how we as a housing authority can support and leverage our resources to improve outcomes for kids. And so these three buckets, or I kind of refer to them as levers, these are the levers that we pull to participate in collective efforts. And so we are utilizing our access to families. So, you know, housing nearly 20,000 children across the county. We have the privilege and opportunity to serve many low-income children across the county, so we have that access to families. We're able to build infrastructure to support various activities and strategies. So, you know, that includes building after-school facilities on some of our properties, as well as early learning centers. So we have 15 out-of-school time programs, and we have 3 early learning centers on our various properties. And then the last piece is being able to advocate around policy, practice, and procedures for strengthening our work and the work of our partners. And so that may look like, as an example, you know, sitting on committees around policy decisions, around funding for out-of-school time programs, and being able to advocate how those dollars could be used to support families that are living in affordable housing and bringing OST programs to their properties, to where they live. So those are the levers that we're pulling as we participate in collective impact, because as Colin was saying, you kind of have to know what you have to work with and what your outcomes are to get the most out of collective partnerships. Sorry, this slide might look like it was a little wonky, but just quickly wanted to share this. Maybe the next slide is a little cleaner. We've organized our work in our place-based educational initiatives around these 5 domains. And so part of the learning that we've done internally over the last few years is really identifying kind of where and how we can make an impact. And this is where we've landed currently. It's always an evolution and learning and changing. But we think about it in this way, that family engagement is the foundational piece of it, you know, leveraging that access to family, and specific strategies that we are engaging in that domain. And so we have a specific goal around family engagement. Essentially, we want families to have the tools and knowledge to help their children be successful in school. And then, so we're employing strategies to achieve that goal. And to that end, we have a goal for each of these areas. So, you know, we want our kids to be kindergarten ready. We don't want our kids to be chronically absent. We want our kids to have access to high quality before and after school time programs. And we want our kids doing well in school and graduating and with a plan for, for college after high school. And so, sorry, let me just kind of go back to this. So some of the work that we are currently doing is, again, coming back to that point that Colin raised, what are the specific outcomes and results that we would like to see, and what can we actually manage and own to work in collaboration and support with our community partners. So for example, in kindergarten readiness, what does success look like, and what are specific performance measures that we can have for ourselves so that we know we are being most successful in our strategies. And so that is some work that we're doing right now. I just want to quickly highlight this and Colin's comment about, when you see communities saying, inside of a community there's 4 different collective impact initiatives happening, and how when that happens there might not be any collective impact. It's a little bit of the situation here in King County. We have 2 Strive Together partnerships in King County. We have the Roadmap Project and we have Eastside Pathways. And Eastside Pathways includes 2 school districts, and the Roadmap Project includes 7 school districts. But then what's happening here locally is we're finding that even specific communities or municipalities are finding that they need their own scale, I guess, to think about it, of collective impact. So that's why you see here I refer to it kind of as nested collective impact. So, we have this consortium of 7 school districts in the southern part of the county that are all part of the Roadmap Project. That's great and has been a great strategy to work on kind of regional issues. But now we're kind of at the point where we're not necessarily seeing the level of results or the speed to getting those results that we would like. And so that's why communities are now kind of coming together and saying, okay, how can we leverage this work that the Roadmap Project has done? How do we come together as a specific community to do the same type of work, and then how is that all aligned and nested into this regional collaboration that's happening? And so it's a bit of messy work right now, but we're really excited to see where that goes. And I've put in this number around 4,000 kids just because I think that that's really important in thinking about why could housing authorities engage in collective impact. It really comes down to this in terms of thinking about the number of families that could be served or we could hopefully see improved outcomes for. If we were doing this work ourselves, there's no way we would be able to do enact our strategies to 4,000 people. But because communities are coming together collectively and we're working together in a coordinated effort around specific results and outcomes we want to see, there's a lot more people helping me get to my goal because that helps them get to their goal. It helps us as a community get to our goal. And so it's a way of thinking about, and I know talking with a lot of my colleagues that are doing the education work, it's much easier to think about our work in a place-based setting, large complexes or buildings that we have that have lots of kids, and we've built perhaps an out-school time program or an early learning center on site. It's much easier to think about how do we bring services and supports to those families compared to how do we bring the same level of services and access to our voucher holders. And they're spread across entire cities or entire communities. How do we do that? And thinking about collective impact as a vehicle to be able to serve those families in a similar way that we might on our large sites. Just want to quickly share this as some concrete examples for what does this look like for us to participate. So this is an example of the work we're doing around kindergarten readiness. And we have a few different strategies that we're employing. And you can see in strategies 2 and 3, there is a regional effort around kindergarten registration. And so, for example, in South King County now, kindergarten registration starts the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And all the school districts have agreed to start accepting kindergarten applications on that day. And the reason being, the earlier kids can apply and get registered, the early they are able to be identified for outreach and engagement efforts and support activities and last minute preschool options or play and learn options. And so through through the partnership, we are able to do whatever we can to support kindergarten promotion. And so that might mean simply doing our own mailing to working with different school districts or specific communities that have kindergarten registration events, like in community centers, to actually doing kindergarten registration at some of our public housing sites. So various things we're doing there, but it's all done in collaboration through the Roadmap project. And then the other piece is around convening partners to align strategies. And so in Eastside Pathways, there's a collaborative work group focused on kindergarten readiness and early learning. And there is now a specific work group or focus group that's attached to that is really just focused on families living in affordable housing, not just KCHA properties, but other affordable housing options in that community. And so it's a discrete working group inside this other group, just as an example of how we are trying to leverage everybody's work to benefit our residents. The next thing is kind of the same thing around attendance. So one of our strategies is equipping our families with information and tools about chronic absenteeism and some simple things that they could do, or activities or strategies they can employ at home to try to prevent chronic absenteeism. And in this effort, we are actually leading a county-wide attendance awareness campaign that occurs in the month of September. And we are leveraging Eastside Pathways and the Roadmap project as key partners in this work. And so we're able to bring all of these different partners and organizations together to have, this unified voice around chronic absenteeism. Same thing with convening partners to align strategies and resources. So in Eastside Pathways, there's an attendance collaborative. It's such a core element of our work that one of my staff members actually leads that collaborative. And so we are, providing our resources to participate in a leadership capacity in the community effort around attendance inside of Bellevue. And then I wanted to share just kind of the results count work that Colin referenced earlier. I was really fortunate to participate in a leadership program last year with Strive Together and four other local system leaders here through a grant that the Roadmap Project got. And it was a year-long, pretty intensive, results-based leadership and facilitation program. And through that experience, and then also kind of building off of some other experiences I've been fortunate to participate in, it's this idea of how are we implementing continuous improvements and getting to results. And so, this idea of using process improvement and problem-solving tools. So a tool that Strive Together is promoting and helping communities implement is a problem-solving tool called an A3. And It allows you to do root cause and factor analysis. My team is using a Kanban for keeping track of kind of all the moving pieces across our initiatives. But the point being using specific strategies and protocols for process continuous improvement. Meeting facilitation and leading groups to action and results. This has been a big piece of our evolution over the last year. We do convene a lot of meetings through these partnerships just because of our unique space. And so knowing how do you lead impactful meetings? So, everything from how do you plan the meeting, what's the result that you want to get, what are the facilitation strategies? I gave a shout out to Holding Neutral, Colin, I like that, but this is a strategy of facilitating meetings that is very tough to adopt, but very liberating once you do, in terms of being able to lead groups of people. Action commitments, this idea of every time you're leaving, you are identifying and reaffirming your action commitments, and then every time you come together, you're checking in on those action commitments. And then the last piece is identifying what matters and is in our sphere of influence. And so this is some of the work that I was really talking about, right, is we are really working to dig down deep and really identify specific measures that we can keep track of and report on. Our belief being that if we do our work better and more data driven, then all of the results stack on top of each other. And so if we're doing that work for our kids, and we can get some other community partners doing the same type of things, and can start talking about entire population level results and how the different strategies that we are employing across the community allow us to stack all these different results on top of each other. That's kind of, I feel like, is what is next for us here in our community. There's a lot of great work happening, but we are kind of in this transition point, I think, in really trying to identify what are these specific measures and results, and are we keeping track of the right thing? How are we using, to Colin's point, he's exactly right, using data today to get results tomorrow, which is a little bit of a shift, I think, from the standard way that our large sectors and institutions have approached this work. So with that, I think that's all I have, and so we'll turn it over to questions and answers.
Great. Thank you guys so much. That was an incredible presentation from both of you guys, just to get both the kind of theoretical view and the individual view. Just as a reminder, please use the Q&A and public chat. I haven't seen any questions come in thus far, so I will kick off with one, if that's all right. Just wanted to get from Ted a sense of, since it seems like you're in a couple different sort of collective impact groups, I'm curious about the makeup of some of these groups and how many of them have, are there other government partners at the table and who they are? And I definitely see a role for school systems and housing authorities, but I'm curious who else is at the table in some of these collaboratives.
Yeah, that's a great question. So public health is in different is in different meetings. So I would say that they are pretty involved, or kind of our King County Public Health Department. And then, not in all cases, but there are several municipalities that are pretty actively engaged. And so, for example, in Bellevue, their city government is very involved. In Renton, their city government, there's a local new effort called the Renton Innovation Zone. Their city government is more involved. But what I would say is that is a growth area for us. And I think it comes back to some of what I was saying, like how do they even know what they can contribute into collective impact? And so I think that is a growth area for us, is being able to articulate to these other sectors and institutions what specifically we're working towards and working on, and helping these other sectors see their results in our results, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. While we're waiting for more questions, I'll throw another one at you guys. Just wanting to speak a little bit about the data and what you mentioned a couple points. I'm sorry, Colin, you mentioned a couple points where we were sort of able to see impacts in certain key communities. As you sort of develop data points, I think something that we've been working on in Chicago and sort of a collective leverage point is identifying in the data, where we're seeing growth, and also, but also acknowledging like where in our collective groups we're reaching some of the neediest students. And I'm curious if you had any sort of experiences or reflections kind of digging into your data as a collaborative and recognizing sort of the student population you're serving and having to, in some cases, maybe even reframe how you're going to measure. So if you can speak to some of the data side of this collective impact, I think that would give some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of quick examples. So when it comes to things, FAFSA completion, right, financial aid form completion, communities like Portland, they ran a series of tests. We talk a lot about these. And I think Ted mentioned that the idea of these like PDSAs, these small tests of change. And in Portland, they actually did a test where they began to teach FAFSA completion in econ class, in economics class. And they saw huge spikes in the completion of FAFSA rates. One, because they were making it relevant to kids. Two, it was a time where they had all kids kind of in class in a formal setting, and they could literally give homework for kids to have the required sort of, your ID and some of the things that you need to have, tax information. Some of those things could become homework. The preschool example in Cincinnati and Dayton is very much one that comes back to disparities, right? And to say, look, even at the time when we were starting to organize for the preschool campaign, even if we got every single one of our preschool providers to get every single one of the kids that they served to be ready for school, what we realized was we would never get to more than like 55% of our student population, and we would particularly never get to those low-income kids and kids in certain communities that had no access to quality pre-K. And so we actually had to shift our strategies to say, look, we can't program our way out of this. We've got to create new sets of system strategies that are actually going to change the system levers. Another thing just around the indicator piece, Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, one of their indicators of community health is now third grade reading rates. So the Children's Hospital is actually holding accountability at their board level for early grade reading proficiency in the community because they're recognizing the connection of that to health outcomes later on down the line, which obviously have a big impact on them. So I think, the refinement of indicators becomes really important. I don't know if Ted might want to share. There's a great example of summer learning loss that they had been working on in King County. Not to put you on the spot, Ted.
Yeah. No. So what Colin's referring to is we had identified, third grade reading as a key measure that we wanted to see improvement on, and then we've identified out of school time activities as a strategy to achieve that goal, and then basically through some problem solving and conversations, what we implemented was at one of our sites that ran a summer literacy program that was focused on preventing summer reading loss. They implemented basically a experiment to see, if we can get kids to feel more engaged every day while they're here, they'll get better results. And so basically the focus was on engagement in their summer program. And it was a simple test started as at the end of every class or every session, they had kids rate themselves red, yellow, or green. So red was like, I did really good today. Yellow was, I had a tough time today. And green is like, I killed it today. And then they were able to keep data. So then they looked at that over the course of the week, and they had a conversation on Friday, and they identified all their red kids and their yellow kids. and they said, what are we going to do different this week to try to move these red kids to yellow and these yellow to green? And it was a 5-week process, basically, of every week kind of going through that process, plan, do, study, act. And by the end, all kids were identifying themselves as highly engaged. Every session, there was a conversations about growth mindset that were kind of came out of this, because teachers, the summer staff started talking to the kids about growth and trying hard every day, and tomorrow you're going to be better than today, like that type of thing, and it emerged into a growth mindset activity. And so then there was this really whole cool work they did around growth mindsets, all part of their literacy. All that to say that by the end of the summer, average reading growth was almost a quarter of a year for on average every kid who participated in the program. So just by making sure that kids were highly engaged every day and talking about their engagement at the end of every week, and specifically talking about specific kids and how are we going to move specific individuals from red to green, yellow to green, so on and so forth. They were able to achieve that result. Super powerful, and it's a strategy we're now going to be pushing out to all of our programs that are doing specific summer programming.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for those ideas, and especially thinking about data and capturing those things at a youth level or a program-based level. That really translates. So thank you guys so much. I think we are coming up on the end of our time here, so definitely want to thank you, Ted, and thank you, Colin. Your contact information is available there on the slide. Abra, anything to close us out?
No, I was just about to say this was so great, and we were right at time. So, and thank you for pointing out the contact information. So if folks think of questions after the fact, or you want it to just talk to Ted and Colin directly and not do so with the whole group, then there are their email addresses. I'm sure Colin would especially be more than happy to talk about if your housing authority was interested in, being an official Strive Together community. That's, I'm sure, something he'd be more than happy to discuss. I see that we did get a question about receiving the slide deck, and yes, I can go ahead and share that. Also, I mentioned at the beginning that I think some of you might have still been joining. We did record today's webinar, so usually that's available in about 24 hours, and I will send out an email saying that the slides are available. It will be on our website at housingiz.org in the CLPHA Education Working Group community, and there will be a link to direct you to that. So I think with that, thank you also. Yes, I add my thanks to Kathy for our presenters, and if there are no other questions, then we will go ahead and close for today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.